Thank you for joining us this evening for Basic Buddhist Teachings. This evening I was in the Hojo talking with SokukoJi, and I asked him what he thought would be a good thing for me to talk about tonight, and he said, talk about the 12 links on the chain of dependent origination. He said, you know those, right? And I said, no. And so he said, talk about them anyway. And I wanted to just start out because the concept of dependent origination, pratitya, samutpada, the 12 nidanas, it's really a foundational concept to Buddhism. It's said that this is what the Buddha saw sitting under the Bodhi tree. He saw these 12 links of dependent origination in reverse, starting with sickness, aging, and death, working all the way back to ignorance or avidya. And I hoped to talk about it at least initially in something a little more tangible, just the idea of what does it mean for something to be dependently arisen. And the example that showed up in my head, something to consider, is most of us drive a car, have driven in a car, ridden in a car, and the average car has 30,000 parts to it. One thing, we call it a car, and that one car is compiled of approximately 30,000 pieces, each one of those pieces probably requiring dozens, if not hundreds of people to take those from raw materials to refined materials to manufactured materials and then put together as a car. So whatever we're looking at as phenomena in front of us, whether it's a person, a situation, circumstances, that while its appearance may be well defined, the appearance of a body, the appearance of a tree, the appearance of an emotion, that nothing comes to fruition of its own accord, that is the product of countless causes and conditions. And because it is this culmination of causes and conditions, we talk about it as not having a self nature. If you were to take apart a car, every bolt, every rivet, every radiator fan, knob, you wouldn't find the car in any one individual piece. And yet if you took away too many pieces, you also wouldn't have a car. So when we look at the idea of dependent origination, what I feel that it is endeavoring to get us to look at is the insubstantiality of what is arising. That the things that we take so seriously and we take offense to, you can't really find what the nugget of that distaste is. Similarly, no matter how great of an accomplishment we put forward, you can't really carve that down to one single situation, one single identity, one single cause. And in that sense, we start to have a little more curiosity about what is arising in front of us, a little bit more consideration that in the midst of the immediate impulse to label something, to reduce something to a concept or to an idea or to a name, we actually begin to look more closely at the texture. And so there's one particular aspect of these 12 links that I would like to talk about tonight. This is a part that SokukoJi has emphasized, and that is the link between desire and grasping. The desire that arises from contact, sensation. If we were to look at the 5 skandhas, a little bit a simpler breakdown of a similar structure, the 5 skandhas: form, feeling, perception, impulse, concept, consciousness. Perception impulse is that first contact or sensation. We confront an individual, we have contact. There's an impulse, positive, negative, neutral. We like it, we don't like it, we're indifferent to it. The desire comes in when that becomes conceptualize or solidify in such a way where we feel like we can do something with it. We want it to last. We want it to go away. We want it to accommodate us. We want it to modify in some form. And this desire, as Sokuzan talks about it, and as it's said other places, is completely appropriate. Have desire. We have a human body. We don't want pain. We would like to be at ease. But it is in the transition from the link of desire into grasping where we tend to really perpetuate this cycle. And it's not to say it's not perpetuating through the entire 12 links, but this is an area where we might actually begin to see it, where that desire actually becomes a demand which we externalize into the world, or we reify through telling ourselves a story over and over and over again. And it is between these two links that Sokuzan calls it the A point, the awareness point, that your awareness may actually be able to begin to see so clearly that the desire doesn't necessarily have to transition into a demand. It doesn't have to transition into grasping. And we have practices around this. We have ways to practice looking at the desire before it becomes a demand. Some of the ways that Sokuzan talks about this is don't hook up your vocal cords. It's very difficult. For those of you that study with us, you come into book study and somebody says something you disagree with or that you find irritating or that they're incorrect and you really want them to know the proper way to think about it. You have a desire for book study to go correctly. And if we don't hook up our vocal cords, the painful thing is we're stuck with those feelings. We're not stuck with them, but there's no outlet. We're not off-gassing our impulses. We actually have to sit there and feel how it actually can increase, particularly if someone else agrees with the confusion of the person you're looking at. So don't hook up your vocal cords. The other one that Sokuzan will say is don't do anything unless you have to. And it's not a call to pacifism. It's not a call to inactivity as a standard, but it is an encouragement not to abandon the very energy that is constantly surging through us and looking for some sort of outlet. So these 12 links are very complicated, but in essence, they apply to all aspects of the phenomenal world. That everything we look at is without the imputed nature. It does not actually contain our thoughts about it. So we're encouraged to take responsibility for those projections, those assumptions, those opinions, to take responsibility because we see that they're not the product of one particular cause. They're just an aspect of consciousness arising. They're just an aspect of the phenomenal world of dependent origination, showing its face for a moment, sticking around for a little bit, and then falling back into wherever that came from. Now, it tends to stick around the more we fight with it. So when desire becomes grasping and we have a great deal of energy towards maintenance, whether it's maintaining a fight against something or maintaining something to stay, we, in a sense, continue to enrich something that does not need enriching, kind of reify our identity through this sort of grasping, this sort of demand. And so as practitioners, we're not encouraged to pull out a sword and break through and cut through these 12 links, but to begin to bring our awareness into the way in which we're constantly seduced into this belief that the relative world of cause and effect has an ultimate validity, that our thoughts will lead to a fruition of right and wrong that is can't be argued. And those links that we bring our attention into is between that desire and the grasping. Notice how intense the energy arises. For me, it's very much a gut and chest thing. It actually is a physical sensation arising in my body. The more intense it gets, it starts to get up into my vocal cords. It starts to dominate my thought pattern. And to see if we can't work with receiving that. Grasping is still occurring because we don't want to outlet. We don't have an outflow out of it. So there's still grasping, but we still have an opportunity to take responsibility when we're not outflowing, making that confusion a difficulty for others. So I would take a few questions if there's any about dependent origination of the 12 links, particularly around desire and grasping. Sanho.
Sanho, is habit energy desire or grasping?
I don't think that it is necessarily. The desire and grasping is when we take these things that are arising spontaneously and we start to, I think of it as systematize it. We put them in positions based on how we view the world. We take something that is arising very effortlessly and we say, what does this mean about me? And how can I manipulate it to support my narrative? So I don't think that the habit energy itself is personalized at all. It arises in a body mind, or it appears to. But I feel like there's further laminations that occur as it shows up as desire and as it gets its outlet in grasping. Yes.
Sanho, for someone who does no mind training, but they quote unquote live in the moment, one of these people.
Sure.
What is the difference between them and someone who is like the Buddha, someone who's maybe enlightened?
I wouldn't argue with those people that have that mentality, that attitude, but what it is a maintenance of an ideology. It's their idea of a moment. It's their idea of what it is to function and live in the moment. It's not to say that there's not a lot of spontaneity or impulsiveness, whereas the way I understand what we might talk about as the fruitional quality is it would be without reference point. You wouldn't have to make a claim like that because you wouldn't see anything to make a claim about. So, go with the flow. Everything is what it is. That's the one that really, it's nauseating for me to hear that, because I look at my negativity, and for someone to say, well, it is what it is. Yeah, but it's burning and it is painful. And so our encouragement is not to just become apathetic or acquiesce to that, but to bring our awareness into it until we don't know what it is we're looking at. Thank you, Samho. Further questions? Unyo.
Unyo, how will we know if we don't know what we're looking at?
I don't think you'll be concerned. There would be no demand. You wouldn't be trying to figure out if you know or if you don't know, or where the reference point is or is not. I think that's where the idea of simplicity comes in, and simplicity is not an absence of movement or an absence of arising and falling. The simplicity is seeing that there's no need to interfere based on prejudice, based on projections. So if we're still looking for a reference point of how do I know, it's a good question to ask. It brings our attention right down into it. But if we're still looking for how do I know, we still have some work to do, you could say. Michael Jackson's playing out on North Avenue. It's Halloween around here, so that's like the third time I've heard Thriller in the past 2 days.
How did you know what that was?
I don't know. I imagine Chiezan might have some of this, or some other musicians or Sanho, you've got a sharp ear. Sometimes all I need to hear is one chord and you know exactly what song it is. Do you have that at all, Chiezan? Yeah, a little bit. The worst though is when you know what it is but you can't remember it, and it just grates at the back of your mind. I know this song, I can't place it. Sorry.
Is there ever a time when demand is appropriate, bowing?
Situationally, but it would not be a demand to prop up one's own preferences or one's own ideologies. The teacher places demand on the student. For those that are close to SokukoJi, that demand may be a lot more intense, but the demand is more about the student's training and seeing than trying to get things to be a particular way. It's very difficult. We have so much conditioning about productivity and resolution through doing things the correct way that sometimes when that demand is placed on us, we immediately go to resolution or where's my shortcoming instead of seeing the immediate situation, which is where, for me, this is personal for me, what am I still defending? Whether I'm able to do what I'm being asked or not, what is the resistance? What is the impulse to fight with that? Or the franticness, the urgency to resolve that because I feel like I've done something incorrectly. It's a very difficult path when it's not enough to just do things correctly as opposed to incorrectly, but to see clearly, regardless of how things are showing up. Bune?
Bune bowing, how do you see a demand shoring up our identity?
I think that when we want the world to accommodate our feelings, when we place a demand on an individual who's not functioning within our prescribed standards of how they should function, you should be more like this, you should be less like that. Aren't you supposed to be a kind person? Aren't you supposed to be this type of person? And a lot of it has to do with the threat we have, the fear we have of not knowing, not being as clear as we think we are. To me, a lot of it comes down to fear. That's how it shows up for me is I'm afraid, so I fight with the world because it's opposing my perceived stability or my desire for stability.
Bune bowing, is there, what would be the opposite of a demand on the opposing side?
No demand. Demand, no demand. Receptivity, generosity. I think those would be words that might work. If you're making a demand, you are saying this is the standard to be maintained, whereas if you are receiving, you're not maintaining anything, you're just being with things as they arise, or the idea of generosity, of just giving everything the benefit of the doubt. Please.
Bune bowing, applying receiving to the 12 links. Does that do something to them?
If we were to go back into those two links that resonate with me, generosity towards the desire, is that it can be embarrassing to see those demands. It can be a little humiliating or frustrating. The generosity would be seeing that you don't need to get rid of the demand, that it has a complete right to be there just by its very presence. The very fact that it's showing up is enough of a reason for it to be there. It also doesn't mean that we have to accommodate the demand by giving into it. So I think our generosity is seeing that the 12 links, when seen clearly, don't obstruct anything. There's a very natural cycle of things arising and falling. The natural world right now, we're coming into fall, so leaves are falling off trees, they're rotting, they're going back into the soil. Next year, the roots will take up those nutrients and produce new leaves. So dependent origination isn't like a dirty word. It's not some damning quality. It's just the generosity where we see we don't have to get on board with it. We don't have to ride that train over and over and over. And yet, so long as we're embodied, we have to have the generosity to engage in a world that's functioning out of that. The Bodhisattva vow is, in a sense, saying that I vow to remain in the midst of all of this movement for the benefit of all beings, but I also aspire to see it so clearly where I am not fueling further confusion for myself and others. So I think that's, to me, how generosity might play into those 12 links. Thank you.
Mahesh going?
Yes, Mahesh.
So since I'm like at work, especially, I'm not very confrontational. So the vocalizing does not happen when there is a difficult situation or there is a desire to be away from certain things. So that is easy, but then I might be doing something else where I'm grasping. I want to understand what that is when we don't vocalize, but it is a difficult situation. I might try to walk away from the situation, or I like change to a different team. So what am I grasping in that case? Well,
I can't accuse you of anything, so this may or may not resonate, but it may be just your own comfort. If you find yourself immediately excusing yourself from a situation anytime it becomes uncomfortable or it's not pleasant to be in, there may be just some idea of strategizing comfort. The other way it may show up, and this is how it shows up for me, is the struggle in my own mind, where I may not actually confront somebody, but I may spend hours just telling a story over and over of how I would say it to them, or how I'm actually correct and they don't understand me, or any number of stories that we tell to ourselves. And again, it's not to necessarily be interrupted, but to just something for us to be aware of. So how that shows up personally for you, I feel that can become apparent through sitting. So continuing to bring your awareness, or just even asking the question, returning to that question, what is grasping? What is grasping? What is grasping? Maybe a good way to look into that area.
Yeah, you're right in the comfort part. Like I think it's just seeking, like being attached to comfort, or not getting into discomfort. Avoiding discomfort is probably the attachment. So what do you suggest there? How do I practice there? Stay in the discomfortable situation longer, or
Again, I wouldn't prescribe anything particularly, but you may experiment with that. You might see if you can't sit with it a little bit longer, see what happens, allow it to resolve itself in a sense. You hold your seat, everything's going to come to some sort of resolution, and then of course it will fall apart again. So we actually can begin to see that cycle. But the biggest encouragement, we have these post-meditation practices like flashing on the senses. That would be one that Sokuzan's instructed. But the most important thing is to do what you are doing, as I understand, which is spending time continuing to look at the production of the mind during Shikantaza. That's been my experience that I feel strongly about, is that anything that needs to arise post-meditation does so spontaneously, but it seems important to have the strong foundation of a consistent practice of seated meditation. So continue to look at the area, ask the questions. You could work on holding your seat a little bit longer or flashing on the senses, but I would emphasize meditation.
thank you. So flashing on the senses is same as alternating sense practice.
Yes, that's yes. There's the formal aspect that Sokuzan teaches, where you actually sit down and you cycle through the 6 sense fields. But the other one that he's given, for me, it's touch. So just flashing on how my body feels, but not maintaining. Don't maintain the sense field as a way to excuse yourself from the difficulty. For me, it's more flashing on that sense field to acknowledge what I tend to ignore when I get consumed with thoughts. Myoka?
Myoka bowing. I lost the question.
Okay, Andy.
Andy bowing. Is there something always confused when there's grasping going on?
It seems that there's the misunderstanding of that there's something that can be possessed. The misunderstanding that there's some sort of progress that we can maintain. At its root, I feel the basic misunderstanding we talk about is the belief in self and other. And so if there's some sort of grasping that is occurring, it's likely that there's a belief that we can actually maintain what we want to possess. It's not to say we can't want nice things. It's not to say we can't enjoy a sauna. That would be nice. Or the pint of ice cream I ate for dinner. But it's the demand around it that makes it so difficult, it seems. Sanho?
What kind of ice cream?
It was Cherry Garcia. It's very tasty.
I live vicariously through you.
Unyo bought it, I think, the other night, and there was still some in the freezer, so I polished it off for her to help everybody. Shodo.
Bowing. How does not knowing what we're looking at help us with our difficulty?
If you don't know what you're looking at, you're not going to be concerned with the difficulty. So you can't artificially not know what you're looking at. So instead of trying to find not knowing what you're looking at to go back and then resolve the difficulty, just give your awareness to the difficulty, and it will become apparent if you look at it long enough that you have never known what you were looking at. But I don't think you can go to the idea of not knowing and then try to bring that back into the present difficulty. You could flash on it as a concept. It's not the actuality of it, but you could actually see what it's like to say, I don't know what this is, even in the midst of feeling very convinced that you do know what it is. So work with what is arising, which is, for most of us, the belief that what we're seeing is valid or real, and the struggle that we have for or against it. Thank you. Yoon?
Knowing what is different about a demand than what we call boundaries conventionally?
I think that's so situational, and I think it's a gray area because sometimes we justify it as a boundary when in actuality it is just a lack of patience or a lot of intolerance for what is occurring. So I feel that every one of us needs to look at that very carefully for ourselves and see. The one I set up for myself recently is I've switched my phone so I only receive phone calls after 10 p.m. That's a boundary I set up after, I wake up at 6 a.m. and I've got 10 or 12 text messages. And if I don't do that, that's 7 days a week where I'm having to wake up throughout the night every night. And so there's a bit of a boundary, but you could also say there's a bit of demand. What's so important about sleeping through the night? I don't do it anyway. So I don't know other than to say that whatever you think it is, don't stop looking at it. If you feel like this is an important boundary for me, that's okay, but don't stop looking at it and think, well, that's done for, because those boundaries also change. The situation may necessitate a different response each time. The demand for me tends to be a little bit clearer in that there's a lot of aggression. There's an expectation that others acquiesce to that expectation. We have time if there's further questions. Unyo.
When you're bowing, how does habit energy play into dependent origination? If we have no free will or no will, or we don't make choices, what is habit energy in the face of dependent origination? Bowing.
I think it's an interesting area because that's something we don't have free will, we don't have choices, we don't, but all of that presumes that there's somebody that doesn't have those choices. It's still based on this mentality. There's some nugget, there's some kernel at the center that needs to be respected or that has some autonomy or sovereignty. And again, it's not to say that we don't have bodily sovereignty. We have some respect for our own bodies. The habit energy is just, I like to think of it as inertia. That's at least an image that's been helpful for me. It's that through beginningless time, things have been arising and falling, and that is not just going to magically cease. So emotions continue to arise and fall, bodies continue to arise and fall. And so this idea of habit energies, again, to me comes back to, even if you want to, you can't get rid of your hands. I mean, I guess you could chop them off. One of the ways Sokuzan said it to me early on, he said, something along the lines of, just because you wake up, it doesn't mean you can change the shape of your ears. So there's certain things you just have no say-so over their arising. So to create some sort of warfare to try to mitigate what's coming down the line is kind of a futile struggle. So the habit energy for each individual can be really intense. And it's important that we don't come to a conclusion of this is how it should manifest for each one of us, or that if you're this far along the path, you shouldn't be having these sort of outflows anymore. Again, I know this is an area I'm personally looking at quite a bit these days, trying to see what that is. Is there more in that area?
Yes, but it's not arising. When you're bowing. So how is habit energy tied to karma? Bowing.
In some sense, I feel like you could make the case that they're synonymous, that you could use those interchangeably. We talk about karma as action. We talk about karma as just the causes and conditions that are arising in any given moment. You can't really separate that from the habit energy, which also is not localized or personalized. It's like we call it karma, we call it habit energy, whatever way we call it, there's enough of a belief in self that we think that we can possess it or modify it or do something with it. And so there's really no humor in that approach, because it's a constant struggle. It becomes very brittle. We're trying to make something that is always in flux, stationary, and so it's painful. Nothing humorous about it whatsoever. And the humor is not that it's going to become funny, but just the softness of not interfering with what needs to arise and fall, what's naturally moving in and out.
Yavine, how can we know what needs to arise and fall away?
The great thing is you don't really need to know, because it's already arising. You know it needs to arise because it's already the case. We don't need to anticipate its arising. Although out of fear we often do. We anticipate what the outcome of an interaction will be. But we don't need to know. It's, in a sense, none of our business, and yet at the same time it's incredibly intimate because it arises right here, sense fields. So if it's arising, give it your attention. When it's not arising, you could say, enjoy yourself. I say that to the functionaries sometimes when I'm working with them, is that if you feel, initially a lot of the functionaries come through and they feel like they're not getting enough training, or they're not doing enough, or they're not sure what to do next. And my encouragement is, when that's the case, just enjoy it, because it's coming. There's going to be a time where you're going to be completely overwhelmed. And so if you're at a moment where that's not the case, don't go looking for something to be the matter. Thank you. Jishin.
Jishin bowing. Is there any value in working with the habit energy? Bowing.
Yes, we do work with it. When we sit down, all that is arising in consciousness is an aspect of habit energy. All the emotions that are arising, all of the thoughts, the way in which we notice how our thoughts put themselves together. That's how we're working with habit energy every day when we sit down to meditate. We sit down and we provide a space to watch the movement of this energy coming and going.
Can we do anything more than just observing? Inertia doesn't sound very appealing. Bowing.
I would be very tempted to do more. I don't think doing more would do much except create more confusion around it. It would be like stirring the water and making it muddy again. I feel like it's painful because we're suffering, and so we want to get the process moving. We want to do more. We want to resolve this negativity. But I don't think that there's anything more to do than to just continue to receive, continue to look at that as it arises.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions this evening? You?
Why do I have so much trouble with dependent origination?
You're probably just not as smart as everyone else.
That's for sure.
I do too. It is not a concept that I resonate with in a way that I want to take away every link. But as Sokusan says, it's enough to study it. There are going to be concepts that really resonate for some. Maybe somebody's the three jewels, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. That is something that some people are very magnetized to. And others are going to be, no, the five skandhas are very helpful for me to look at. You could say all of the Buddhist teachings are pointing back to one thing, direct perception. And so it's okay for one set of concepts to not make sense or to not feel as supportive, but when it comes up, we can still look at it. We can still, like you're doing, ask questions about it. It is a complicated one too. I feel it's a complicated system. It's not as simple as passion, aggression, and ignorance. Those are so tangible. I see how I fight. I see how I grasp. I see how I don't want things to be a particular way. But to go in and try to take something apart, starting with ignorance and going through all these 12 links, becoming, sickness, aging, death, it's pretty complicated. That's my justification for not knowing what I'm talking about. Shoto?
Going in that link between desire and grasping, I've heard Sokusan talk about a gap.
Mm-hmm.
And is there some need to stay there to see through that?
Don't maintain it. Don't go in there with some sort of aggression trying to pin it down. But it is an area that has a certain quality that makes it more visible. I feel like I can notice when I really want something, and I can notice when I start trying to manipulate my surroundings to get that thing. So in that sense, it's a little bit more tangible than ignorance, the first link. It's a little bit more tangible than karmic formations. Consciousness, that's a very difficult thing, an abstract idea. Sickness, aging, and death, birth, arising, causes and conditions. But there's something that it's so human. I mean, we're in the realm of desire. There's the three realms: desire, form, and formless. And it's said that the human realm is in the realm of desire. So we know about that. So I think that's why that Sokusan emphasizes that area so much.
Is an outflow the same thing as that movement from desire to grasping?
It may be, but as Sokusan says, it's not that you necessarily will stop outflowing. It's that the outflow is no longer being claimed. There's no longer an outflower claiming that expression. So there's no way to prescribe how one that sees the truth is going to function. So instead of, as practitioners, looking at how we can stop the outflow, we can put tension on that area. We can try not to hook up the vocal cords so that there's a little bit more space to see what is occurring there. But I feel that, again, just whatever is arising and in whatever form it is arising, be generous in that you're going to give it your attention. There's no need to accomplish anything in that sense.
What's the disappointment that comes up when we set up a form, we set up the tension to be kind or to not outflow in a particular area, and we just keep seeing how relentless we're doing that?
I think it's different for everybody. Some of it's just the embarrassment around it, and some of it also tends to be the belief that if we could accomplish it, there would be some reward. That, again, we believe that our realization is going to be the product of doing something correctly, instead of seeing that it's already the case in the midst of everything that we're struggling with. So I think initially there's a lot of embarrassment. We just see that we don't actually want to be kind sometimes. And the other part is that we just we just keep telling ourselves, if I could just do this correctly, I would be an enlightened person, or all my troubles would go away.
You know, if we're aspiring on the bodhisattva path and we're continually in a situation where we're relentlessly unkind, does the vow prescribe anything for that, to stick it out or anything?
You use the word aspire, and just continue to aspire, continue to intend, and you may find that there are just functional things. If you're ever justifying why it's okay for you not to be kind, that's a very suspicious area. It is not hard to say, how are you doing today? It's not difficult to put some dishes away. It's not difficult to run a vacuum, to smile. Sometimes it is. It can be, I know. So it doesn't need to be a grand gesture. It doesn't have to be some sort of action that's going to go viral on the internet. It's just functional decency. It's just a recognition of the humanity that is arising, the desire for that not to be in any more pain than it already is in. So I don't know how that shows up for each person, but yes, I think we can put a little tension in that area, but just be careful it doesn't tip into the other side where it becomes just artificial, where you're looking to present as a particular person.
I'm kind of curious about the other side of that, where I kind of just feel like I'm never going to be kind in this situation, and it feels like it would be appropriate just to remove myself from that situation.
You are in a very wonderful position in that you have a living teacher, and I would utilize that for as long as you can to get some very direct instruction in that area. So you're in a spot where you don't have to know what to do personally, that you could actually ask your teacher how to relate to that situation and see if there's not some direction that would help you put tension in that area without locking down. You can stand and dedicate the mirror. Thank you all so much